she's staring at.
Ruiner Pinball, released in 1995 for the Atari Jaguar video game system from High Voltage Software, best known for games such as White Man Can't Jump and other stuff as well, I suppose, is a pinball video game featuring two distinct boards to play. Ruiner, a wide war-themed table, and The Tower, an exceedingly tall table adopting a fantasy motif. And Ruiner Pinball, well, that's actually a badass title, but it's also every pinball video game you've played from around this time, similar to things such as Dragon Fury on the Genesis or Alien Crush on the TurboGrafx. Now, Ruiner Pinball does have a couple neat gimmicks going for it. There's a mini camera thing that pops up whenever other stuff on the board is happening, some part of the board lights up or whatever the case may be. If this distracts you, you can turn it off. And there's also zooming effects that occur during transitions or whenever there's multi-ball play throughout the various segments of the board. That's actually rather neat. The zoomed out gameplay does get a bit choppy at times, which almost ruins, no pun intended, the effect, but it's a neat idea regardless. Other than that, Ruiner Pinball plays like every other pinball video game that was available for the time on the console side of things at least. You have buttons for the flippers, they work. You have buttons for nudging the board, they work. A launch button, that works fine. Control is adequate, the pinball physics is about as solid as you could get with this sort of game. There's plenty of moving targets, objectives, things of that nature. It doesn't try to stick with a realistic pinball setup, so you have these moving characters and ships flying around the board that you could take out with your balls. That could also mess your game up a bit if you're not careful. I mean, listen, if you like these sort of pinball video games, then Ruiner Pinball is another one to add to the pile. And it is a fun little pinball video game thing to play, which is never a bad thing to have on any of your consoles. It's just that when you're playing a console that boasts 64 bits of power, you'd figure they'd come up with something a little more exciting than what's on display here. But on the other hand, you take that expectation out of the equation, and Ruiner Pinball does what it does more than adequately, and sometimes that's all you really need for a really fun game, and Ruiner Pinball is certainly that. Assuming you're into these sort of things in the first place, that is. Now, I'll say this much, the two boards on display do look pretty damn sweet. The artwork is nice and colorful, there's quite a bit of stuff going on with the various segments, the scrolling is fairly smooth. The game does give you the option to play with either plain balls or textured ones, and the textured balls are really minor details here and there, but it is a neat detail regardless. And of course, the zooming effects are a thing here as well. The only real sour point I have with the game is the audio. Sound effects are fine for the most part, but the weak-sounding pseudo-techno music bits does hurt the game somewhat, I feel. This is one area that could have done with some improvement, but it is what it is, so whatever. Overall, Ruiner Pinball, well, it's a badass name for a badass game. Well, half that statement is true, your mileage may vary on the other half. But the game itself is a fine, solid piece of electronic video pinball entertainment software that ranks high up there with the best that the genre has to offer, either at the time or even beyond. It's not a standout title or anything, it's not something that's going to sell anyone on an Atari Jaguar in any way, shape, or form, especially nowadays, but it is a fun little pinball game with a couple neat gimmicks that's a good little time waster, and if you want to call this one of the best games that the Jaguar has to offer, then yeah, I could probably go along with that. In any event, I think it's safe to say that no pinball was ruined with Ruiner Pinball on the Atari Jaguar. Yeah, we're really ending on that note. Good night.